So when it comes to medical education, there's things that are really fun. Like tomorrow I'm presenting a virtual reality simulation for mass casualty triage. Like that's really interesting to me. What I'm about to present to you is kind of what I would refer to as the vegetables of medical education. So you know, I have kids and you can't just have Oreos for every meal. You have to have some vegetables. This is a very important topic. It's a little bit dry, and I don't think, at least from my standpoint, I didn't know anything about this when I became the clerkship director. But it's very important. Yeah.
All the slides are on the app.
Yeah.
I'm taking pictures of it, so feel free to ask. They said they're on the app, so you can just pull down from there. Some of these are kind of pulled off, and then some of the LCME other requirements so are able to read. So okay, that's another option too.
Yeah.
From the app, you can email the slides to yourself, so if you don't want to see it on your phone, you can read them.
So yeah, I do have some of the LCME standards on here. Oh boy. Okay, here we go. So we're going to talk about the learning environment based on LCME Standard 3. We'll talk about what a positive learning environment is, what a negative learning environment. We'll talk about mistreatment. And actually, in the case that Kendra presented, ignoring a student is considered mistreatment. That's neglect and it's considered mistreatment. So you actually can't just ignore a student. Identify strategies to improve and optimize the learning environment. So what is the learning environment? This is everything in the context where learners learn, and it influences the learner. So somebody had mentioned that they have PTSD from their thoracic surgery rotation. The thing that's important to know is the nurses, the social workers, everybody who's in that environment counts towards the learning environment. And so those things are going to be monitored in this context. So the elements are the teacher's skills, the learning space, the size of the group. If you have too many learners and the medical student gets ignored, then that's a piece of the learning environment. The timetable, the learning outcomes, the assessment methods. Other elements include a sense of belonging, a sense of being on the team. Transportation. So we monitor safety. So I don't know where your students go for their rotations, but if they don't have transportation and they have to try to find a ride home at midnight in the inner city, that's a piece of the learning environment. Personal safety. So we had a safety on service report for one of our global health rotations where a student didn't feel adequately supervised or safe while they were there. So here are the elements of an ideal learning environment. So it should be welcoming, friendly, collegial. There should be mutual respect. There should be trust. It should be a safe environment. Cooperative. The student needs to feel like they're a part of the team. Supportive of learning and teaching oriented. So think about your emergency department and does it fit these ideals? A poor learning environment is poor communication of expectations. So the gentleman that was sitting over here, I thought made a really good comment when he said, when a student arrives on shift, one of the first things I ask them are, what are your goals for the shift? What are your expectations? Lack of empowerment, a culture of fear. Hopefully medicine's kind of moving away from this idea of you know, the power differential and fear out of a student. Students feel unable to express their views, disrespected as future colleagues, sense of no ability to respond to unjust evaluation and excessive workload. So I'm going to talk about all these things, but these are things that you have to monitor on your clerkship. All right, so again, this is kind of the vegetables of medical education. We have to do it. It's not always fun, but I can tell you if any of you have been through an LCME visit or are about to encounter an LCME visit, these are things that you have to track. So at Ohio State, the way we do this is we have a question. I was treated by respect. I was treated with respect by this individual, and I witnessed this individual treating others with respect. So I can tell you at our institution, some of the reports that we've gotten hasn't been the attending belittling the student or berating the student, but it's been the student witnessing the attending berating a nurse or a tech. That counts. That's a part of the learning environment. So those are things that you have to watch. If I roam too far, it doesn't work. So I won't spend too much time on the LCME standards because that's what Luan's going to cover. But Standard 3 is the big one that tells us that we have to monitor this environment that we put our students in. And we have to ensure medical education occurs in a professional, respectful, and intellectually stimulating environment. We have to recognize the benefits of diversity, and we have to let students promote attainment of competencies to become future physicians. Now this one's dying. Some of the institutions, or some of the information that your institution's going to get on the learning environment comes from this. This is the double AMC Graduate Questionnaire, or GQ. Your students fill this out when they graduate, and it was started in 1992, and questions include whether they've experienced any of several types of mistreatment, who was the source of the mistreatment, who they reported it to, and what were the actions taken. So the LCME, when they come in, they're going to wonder what your response to the graduate questionnaire was. These are the actual questions on the questionnaire. So were these professional behaviors demonstrated by your school's specialty? And I think Kendra did a good job of mentioning a lot of these, so I won't belabor these, but being respectful of other specialties, providing constructive feedback, showing interest in patients. Oops, well, see, now it's going fast. So again, these are the behaviors. Have you been publicly embarrassed? Have you been publicly humiliated? Have you been physically harmed? Believe it or not, there's going to be affirmative responses to that, and you're going to have to figure that out. And so these are behaviors directed at the student. And so did you report any of these, and who did you report it to, and what was the response? So we told you that you have to have an end-of-shift CPA for your student. You also want to have an evaluation of your faculty and evaluation of your course. And on the evaluation of your faculty, you need to ask questions about the learning environment. These are the questions we ask. The faculty healthcare team and other staff on this assignment created an environment that promoted appropriate professional values. Students were treated with respect. Did you feel the supervision of you as a student on this course or clerkship was sufficient to promote a safe environment for you and your patients? These are right off of our clerkships. We have a standardized evaluation of clinical instructor. So do you guys standardize that, or are all the clerkships kind of different?
They're all the same except for a couple of questions that can be more specific.
Yeah, and we went to this, and this was really helpful, I think, because every clinical instructor gets the same evaluation. We call it the standardized evaluation of clinical instructor. And again, the questions we asked, this teacher treated me with respect. This teacher treated other students with, or others with respect. And again, that can include nurses, techs, housekeeping, whoever. So just some other things about LCME Standard 3. They mentioned that you should have a diversity pipeline program, an anti-discrimination policy. I think EM's getting better at the diversity pipeline. For those of you that are on the CORD, CDEM, or SAEM listservs, people are advertising scholarships for students who are underrepresented in medicine. I think there's over 40, and these are being added on, as we speak. We do this at Ohio State. We have a diversity program that's called MedPath. So if you don't have a program for promoting diversity in your medical school, you need to do that based on the LCME. The learning environment should promote ongoing professional values, and the school has responsibility for periodic evaluation of the learning environment. So I found this article, and I was happy to see that Joe House is the lead author on this. So I thought this was a great paper. We're not going to talk a lot about scholarship today, but this is a great example of there's scholarship in stuff that you're doing every day anyway. So, Joe, you can speak to this, but as I read this paper, they were having some trouble with the learning environment on the emergency medicine clerkship. So they took 2 years' worth of data, and they looked at all the data, found out that there was a small rate of student neglect, student mistreatment, some unprofessional values, and they did faculty development sessions bi-yearly to get people better, and their scores improved. Is that kind of what happened?
Yeah, the data we did use some data from the GQ, but a lot of our data came from course evaluations, individual faculty evaluations. We also, our students and then most schools do it as well, they can submit mystery reports like the medical school as well, so they can be identified in that. So it makes it a little harder to follow up on those things. But we kind of took all that data and then, like they said, kind of looked at what are the themes. So we came up with 5 or 6 big themes. And yeah, so what we do, so we do the faculty development like you mentioned. We actually do every month our faculty meetings. We spend 15 minutes on some sort of topic. Sometimes it's feedback, sometimes it's diversity. So it kind of has time to carve out. So yes, we actually present this data to that group. Again, we kind of put it out there so people actually start talking about it. We also use it, like I said, as part of the value of kind of standardizing your teaching evaluations across the institution is, all of us are, this is some pretty type A, very competitive people. So it worked out well. I would say, hey, here's what our numbers look like. Here's what everybody else's numbers look like. And hey, our quality of feedback is the lowest one. Or here's our quality of feedback. Or hey, everybody's doing great. We were the highest ones. And hey, let's keep it up. That sort of thing. So it's kind of just putting that data out there. And that was actually one purpose of this. There's not a lot of data about specific mistreatment. It happens everywhere. And it's one of those things that we do talk about.
Well, I was just telling Kendra on the walk back from break, I just got the brand new Clerkship Directors Guidebook. If you guys don't have this, CDEM, Clerkship Directors in Emergency Medicine, is one of 8 member organizations of the Alliance of Clinical Educators. This includes the PEDS Education Group, the Surgery Education Group, ACOG, which is the group of obstetrics and gynecology, and they've all partnered together as a group called the Alliance of Clinical Educators. And that group publishes a book called the Guidebook for Clerkship Directors, and they just came out with the 5th edition. And I just got my copy probably a week ago, and I opened that thing up to the chapter on learning environment because I was going to get some really good nuggets, and there's no chapter on learning environment in that book, which I was blown away. I mean, I think, and to your point, when you do a PubMed search on the learning environment or mistreatment, there's stuff out there, but not as much as you would think. So, as much as, this isn't as fun as talking about simulation and direct observation and things, it's just a really important topic. So I'm going to close with some these are actual cases that happened at my institution. So you're hearing a medical student, and again, this is actually in how it was reported. So you could be perceived as biased, but you're hearing a medical student present a case to the team of a male patient who is HIV positive. The resident then asked the student if the patient is gay and if he is a pitcher or a catcher. And again, this was submitted to our anonymous reporting button. The student's visibly uncomfortable and says he doesn't know. Chiding and kidding begins about guessing the answer to the question. So you're the attending. Let's say you're the attending in the doc box and you hear this happen. What do you do? Absolutely. Right. And I think if you're not the program director and the resident's not a part of your program, that program director needs to find out, because this is a huge violation of the learning environment. And when we witness these things, we can't ignore them, because they're going to get reported, and we're going to get, eventually the LCME is going to see your numbers. So that would certainly be the way I would handle that. I don't know why this is. All right, so effective gender on clerkship experiences. So this is a big thing as well. So we can't stereotype roles, abilities, and specialty choice. There can't be discomfort due to culture from one gender. I don't know about your institution, but I've actually, there's been studies in the literature that looks at OBGYN and ortho, as being one is predominantly female, one's predominantly male, and how are students perceived and treated if they're of the opposite gender in that case. I don't need to go into great detail on Title IX, but the LCME definitely wants us to know about this: romantic and/or sexual relationships between individuals on a supervisory, teaching, evaluation, advising, coaching, or counseling offer a conflict of interest. This is discouraged. It should be prohibited in most cases. And then your institution would have a disclosure process if this ever happened, where there was a romantic relationship between a resident or a student and an attending. The other thing that I don't have a slide on that you also have to be cognizant of is we're not supposed to be evaluating students that we've treated medically. So if we actually have the first box on our evaluation is I have not provided medical or psychiatric care for this student, because there's a conflict of interest there as well. So you need to know about that also. Again, sexual harassment, this is a big part of the learning environment. It's on the graduate questionnaire. I was sexually harassed or demeaned, so you need to know about that. Oops. All right, case 2. During sit-down rounds, the attending arrives a bit early. The resident is finishing up an urgent consult. The attending gives her Starbucks card to the medical student and asks him to get coffee for the team while she finishes up co-signing notes. Is this inappropriate? What contextual factors might sway you one way or the other? What if the student were asked to get the MRI disc of an urgent consult? So what do you think of this? Remember, the AAMC GQ says this attending I was asked to provide favors. And scut work is a big topic. So the crux of this case is, what's the difference here? So what do you think about this? Is the coffee thing okay? I mean, the student's not paying for it.
Unfortunately, it's really situational.
Yeah.
There are some students who I would say this is abuse of a student and not the use of my skills and resources. And there's other learners that are more, I don't want to use the term team player, because I'm not saying one is right or wrong, but wouldn't take offense to this and recognize that, well, if I'm not doing anything right now, I will go help out with colleagues. You are sort of figuring out what are the dynamics in the situation. They do the MRI, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this is building relevance for the student. So if they're just getting an MRI on a random patient that they weren't asked to see and aren't involved in the case, that sounds a little bit like scut work. When they're a part of the care team and the MRI is going to impact the decision of a patient that they're helping care for, I mean, that's patient work. I mean, how many times have you tried to chase down records from a nursing home or whatever? That's not scut work, that's our job. So I think building relevance is really important here. Case 3, a student on a colleague's team comes to your advice. She stumbled on a presentation the other day and the attending said, well, I suppose that's okay for a blonde. Again, these are de-identified, but were cases that were submitted to our ombudsman. Yesterday, he said, after seeing a bookish patient, I bet you like nerdy guys, blah, 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 and then a text message was sent. So it makes my institution sound bad. I can tell you that these things are probably happening everywhere. I've heard of much more egregious. Joe, when's the last time Michigan beat Ohio State in football? Just kidding. No, but he can mention basketball. We haven't beat them in a long time. So I think my take-home points here is you have to respect professional boundaries. I'll be honest with you, very few students have my cell phone number. I just think texting back and forth with a student, I'll do that in certain situations, like during the SOAP, the student that I'm advising, they have my cell phone number. But even like Facebook friend requests, I don't Facebook friend students while they're students at Ohio State. When they graduate, I absolutely do, because I use social media as a way to get a hold of people that have graduated. But I think, you know, this is obviously sexual harassment. And, you know, we just need to make sure that we're not doing those things and we're respecting boundaries. So student mistreatment, again, we talked a lot about this. I think the big thing on this page is mechanisms for reporting violations of the Code of Professional Conduct are understood by students. So I'll tell you what we do with this. Our education learning platform is called Vitals. It's a homegrown educational learning platform. We have a very prominent button for student mistreatment at the top, and students can press that button and they can generate an anonymous report. The LCME mandates that your students know how they can anonymously report mistreatment. So not only do they have to be able to report it, it has to be anonymous, and they have to know that it exists, because there's been instances where the LCME comes and they interview students, and there's a way that this happens, but the students don't know about it. So it's just important that you have that at your institution. So again, you know, these are the type of incidents we're concerned about: embarrassment, humiliation, aggressive questioning, belittling, personal services. We talked about the coffee. Just avoid it. Get the coffee yourself. You know, then you don't have to worry about it. Threat of physical harm or actual physical harm. So believe it or not, that happens. Mistreatment based on gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and sexual harassment. So again, this is not a fun topic to talk about, but it's very important. I have like 2 more slides here. Marginalized learners. So it's important, we talked a lot about the difference between students who are going into emergency medicine and students who aren't. There really should be no different in the way you treat those students. In the same way that when our students go to rotate on OBGYN, we wouldn't want them to be treated differently. So it's important that we treat everyone the same way. And then just strategies for improvement. Learners must be welcome, included, respect and civility for all learners, enhance the training for teachers, resilience training for learners, and just making sure that you can evaluate your data, make sure students can report this, make sure faculty know about it. So there's some references. Again, you guys have the slides. This is Joe's paper on improving the learning environment. It's a great way that you could do it at your shop. All right.
For that paper, we actually went to our chair in the medical school, and just you don't want anybody kind of getting surprised by seeing this paper in publication where you talk about your mistreatment. So we actually checked with them and just make sure there weren't any issues or concerns. And both of them were very free, like, oh no, that sounds great, we got to get this data out. So we did kind of check with people. So one of the new sessions that we added on this year was talk about the SLO. And part of it is again, what do new clerkship directors need to learn, but also what are some of the good and the bad about when you're reading through SLOs. So we'll have some opportunity, we'll have to figure out tables how we best want to do this, but actually looking at some data from either students that ended up not going to emergency medicine, because sometimes I'll write SLOs for students who later decide not to do it, or again, some students that end up going into there who may have had some issues, and how do you write that into a SLO. So again, what is a SLO? So standardized letter of evaluation. And a lot of this, again, if you guys go to Core DM resources,
the cdemcurriculum.org that was mentioned on one of the earlier slides, a lot of this information is on there. So again, take a look at that, especially if you're new to writing SLOs. So again, what's the purpose? It was developed to provide a global perspective on an applicant's candidacy. So instead of just kind of those standardized, not standardized letters, but those long letters about how great the student was, again, this is a goal to try to standardize it. So I can, with the goal being I can compare students from Ohio State to students from East Carolina to students from U of M, even though they're very different learning environments. So, and again, it's really the applicant's candidacy for training, providing meaningful comparison to peers applying for EM. So again, the goal is it's standardized, it's concise, and again, there's some discriminating data for it. So what should be there? So again, overall perspective on what the candidate offers to a program. Provide comparative data to peers. So again, so there's the kind of the at, the above, or below the peers. And it's not really meant to be, this student shouldn't go into EM. It should be, again, that middle third, that at level, that's going to be your middle third of your students. So you're going to have a third who are going to be, above peers, and you're going to have a third that are going to be below peers. But just by saying that, a student is in the lower third, it doesn't mean they're not right for EM. We want to see that full perspective. Maybe sometimes it does. But you want to see that full perspective of those students. Again, you're trying to rate them. And the other thing would be, we'll talk a little bit more kind of after people present it, but if there are issues, so if you are saying that someone's in a lower third, or there's actually a slot in there where you actually say, where the student might rank on your rank list, where a student ranks compared to previous students who have gone into EM. If there's discrepancy, if the student got an honors, but yet you're ranking them, lower third, or even saying you're not going to rank them, is use that information to kind of describe so you know why it's not. So written comments, again, it should be about the individual. So for those that have not looked at what the SLO looks like, there's actually two different text boxes. The top one is, okay, you need to write information about the individual. Don't write the exact same thing that's in one of the other areas. So again, we'll try to personalize that to the student, address any unusual situations for the applicants. And this kind of sometimes gets into that zone of we might know more than what we should know, because again, we may know that student for 3 years, 4 years. We may know some background information about that student. So for me, I started advising students. I sent emails day one, or not day one, but like in November of the first year for medical students, say, hey, if you're at all interested, come meet with us. So when you meet with students, depending when you meet with them, you learn a lot of information that, other places maybe you shouldn't know sometimes, because you do become, friends. Like what Nick said, you try not to friend them on Facebook, but you do get to know them personally. So again, how much of that information do you actually want to put out there? But again, if you know that this person took a year off, try to describe why they took the year off, or if there's other extenuating circumstances, try to describe it. We had one student who had a poor outcome on their step one. I know background information on kind of why that may have happened, but he actually didn't feel comfortable putting that into a letter. So we didn't include that. So again, some of that stuff you actually may need to talk to the students to say, hey, are you okay doing this? Or, hey, someone might ask you about this. And then now the other part would be is, a lot of people say like, oh, we utilize a full, thirds, or we are an inner city population, here's our number, our census. All that should go in that last box to kind of set the stage of where the student rotated at. The other thing that people don't always know about, so there's actually other options for SLOs. So if you are at a site that does not have a residency, so there's actually a different SLO like that. Because obviously, you're not going to have that question on where would the student rank on your rank list if you don't have a residency to rank a student's at. Or I think someone had mentioned earlier about the third rotation. Maybe your third rotation isn't a core EM rotation. Maybe it's ultrasound. Maybe it's tox. So there actually is a separate one for SLO for subspecialty rotations. So like we have ultrasound rotation, we have wellness medicine rotation, we have a critical care rotation. That's the SLO that they would be using, is the non-core rotation one. And then like I mentioned, so again, if you're new to reaching SLO, so if you go to that site, there's links to email, mentors through CDEM to kind of help direct or help you give you feedback on SLOs, or again, if you have some of these questions to kind of help direct some of those. So any questions at all about the SLO before we kind of go into practicing?